Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. My name's Adrian Lloyd, and this is just my stupid opinion.
You profit from fear and hate, hoarding wealth and amassing power. The walls have been unleashed. We will not submit or cower. It's humanity's darkest side. We are ruled by thieves and liars.
Okay, so today we're going to be talking a little bit about Kinder Morgan, since that's been the big thing that's been going around in Canadian news lately. Has been the postponement on the work that's being done there by the company, and now they are threatening to actually completely halt all production of the pipeline going out into Vancouver. And this has to do with the bitch fight that Alberta and BC has been for the last month or so. Wow, I fail at lighting matches, apparently. They're shitty matches anyway. So, right now, Premier Horgan of BC has been putting the brakes on the Kinder Morgan pipeline because he's an NDP, he's very pro-environment. I'm not against being pro-environment per se. I mean, I actually want to keep the environment protected. You could even say in a lot of ways I'm pro-environment. But we also have to keep looking at things realistic. Pipelines create a lot of money. Pipelines create a lot of jobs. So that's why I'm pro-pipeline. And besides, there are worse ways to actually transport oil. While, yes, oil spills do happen, actually pipelines are not one of the worst ways to ever transport oil and not have the biggest risk. The pipeline can be shut off should something happen. If they're designed properly, then you won't have a problem. The total project is right now projecting to be $7.5 billion by the time it's done. But as it stands, the brakes are on that. We're not going to have anything going with that. So what ended up happening was that earlier in the month, Justin Trudeau ended up bringing Premier Rachel Notley of Alberta and Premier Horgan together to try and discuss this. And he was going to try and get them make amends, and he said that the pipeline's going to get built. Now, despite this really nothing came out of this. It was just a big thing for them to do for the press. Nothing came out of it. They spoke to Horgan. It seemed like they talked about how it was a good conversation, yet what has happened because of it? They're still in the same problem. They're still in the same situation they're in now. So the latest developments that have been going on is that people have been talking about how now the government is going to put in money, subsidize some of the pipeline in order to pay back some of the costs, because Kinder Morgan's putting the brakes on this because they say all the disputes between the government and the activists and the protests are causing too much friction for them, too many problems for them trying to build it. Some are claiming that Kinder Morgan is taking advantage of the government by doing this, and that they're blackmailing the government into putting money into this project. And I think it's a little bit of category A, a little bit of category B. I think that Kinder Morgan is taking advantage of this to try and get the government to pay for part of their pipeline. I do actually think that is part of it. However, I do not believe that that is the whole thing that's going on. I do not believe that this has been a blatant blackmail attempt by Kinder Morgan. I think there are obviously real obstacles in the way that is preventing them from getting the pipeline built. And I'm sure in a lot of ways they feel that their time has been wasted, their money has been wasted, so that they want some sort of the government to make some sort of put something in order to make their time worthwhile, to make all their efforts worthwhile. Otherwise, fuck the project. Why bother doing it if it's going to be such a problem? So, Justin Trudeau and his government are currently in private discussions for money for Kinder Morgan. This is going on in Houston, New York, Toronto, and Calgary. So it says they are privately holding new financial discussions for new financial subsidies for fossil fuel giant Kinder Morgan when Kinder Morgan threatened to cancel its multi-billion-dollar project due to uncertainty driven by opposition to Trans Mountain in BC. Please excuse all of the me clearing my throat. It's actually early morning. I crashed out at a weird time last evening and I woke up really early. So anyway, I would say actually out of everything that's going on, this is my biggest concern as well, and why I say it's a bit of category A, bit of category B. While I do think there's some blackmail going on by, well, maybe not blackmail is not the right word, but while I think that Kinder Morgan is taking advantage of this situation in order to get the government to pay for their pipeline, I don't actually believe the government's opposed to this. I think the government wants to put in the money. Because Justin Trudeau, underneath his leadership, we've seen a giant rise in government jobs. Like the jobs that he creates are not in the private sector, but he creates them in the public sector. And under his leadership over the last two, almost coming, I guess 2.5, going to be going on the third year soon. Underneath his leadership, the government has taken over many more industries. They've given many more bailouts. Now, this is very similar to what Obama did too. If you think back to the bailouts that he gave to GM, he gave the bailouts to GM, and I actually was not aware at the time, but I recently, just talking to a few people, apparently after that he quietly fired many, if not all, of the CEOs for GM. He recommended it, and it ended up happening. So the government ended up taking control, or at least partly, of GM in America. So this is the same sort of thing I see Justin Trudeau doing. He's already offered bailouts to many more companies. Probably the most well-known one is Bombardier. He's given them plenty of bailouts, even though it's a failing company. I'm not going to hold him completely accountable. It's not accountable to that. It's not like he's the only prime minister that's given bailouts to Bombardier. However, he's given out huge bailouts to Bombardier. And, he's given a huge bailout to Kinder Morgan. So he's prepared. The latest statistics, as I'm hearing, is that there are talks to about $2 billion that are going to be put in by the government. $2 billion into this project out of a project that's supposed to cost $7.5 billion. That's about what, maybe a third of the entire project. But then my real concern to this is because this then again becomes another commodity that comes underneath government control. It ends up being another company that comes underneath government control, and right now we're talking about the oil. And the thing is, too, is Justin Trudeau, when I say he didn't really try very hard with this meeting Rachel Notley, he has the power. When we're talking about pipelines, the government has the federal power to dictate if they want a pipeline built, it's got to get built. He actually could have overruled Horgan if he wanted to, but he didn't. He didn't do it. He actually has the authority to flex his power, and he was unwilling to do so. He could have gotten that pipeline built. He could have ordered Horgan to do it, but he didn't. And this is why I believe that the government wanted to do it. It's another government bailout. And even since then, what Rachel Notley is planning on doing is she's releasing Bill 12, the Preserving Canada's Economic Prosperity Act. So and essentially what she wants to do, we'll just get down to it, or just skip the definitions part. We look here. She's trying to add a license that people would have to, a license that people would need in order if they wanted to transport crude oil out of the province. So as we see here, it says Section 2, Subsection 1, no person shall, without a license, export from Alberta any quantity of natural gas, crude oil, or refined oil. So yeah, I guess even more than just crude oil, it was covering everything. Before making an order under subsection 2, the minister shall determine whether it is the public interest of Alberta to do so, having regards to whether adequate pipeline capacity exists to maximize the return of crude oil and diluted bitumen produced in Alberta. So when they're talking about this part of it actually seems like a directly related to what's going on in BC. So what I really think that Notley and the NDP, the Alberta provincial government, along with Justin Trudeau, is they're trying to bring the oil more under government control than private control. Because she also, this again, it's a big Notley giving a big middle finger to BC. This way she could actually control where the oil goes, because they have to issue the license, and then she can also restrict the oil flow into Alberta right now. This was actually, people were wondering about if this was going to be the case because of the court case that ended up happening. The court case that ended up happening last week. It was the Supreme Court court case, and it was RV Como, if I'm remembering correctly. And this one had to do with transporting beer specifically across provincial lines. And it was because this man Como, he bought his beer in Quebec. He ended up going, and then he went over to New Brunswick, and then he ended up getting caught by, I believe it was the RCMP. Actually, they watched him as he crossed provincial lines, and they ended up arresting him. So then he was trying to claim that it's freedom to transport this material through the province. So he was saying essentially, his argument was in the Constitution, in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Values, that it's there's part of it where it was suggesting that there's supposed to be sort of a free trade in Canada amongst the provinces. And the justices on the Supreme Court decided that this was not the case, so that Quebec and other provinces have every right to protect their alcohol being brought across provincial lines. They also said one of the main reasons this had to do with monitoring, keeping the alcohol underneath government regulation. They say if you're transporting across provincial lines, it becomes significantly harder for them to control who has it, where it goes, blah, 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 blah. So this was why it didn't come up. But when this court case was announced, people were starting to wonder if this meant that Alberta could actually shut off the taps of oil to go into BC, because this was another threat by Notley. She says if you didn't want to do it, if Horgan didn't want to do it, and BC didn't want to do it, fine, we don't need to give you our oil. But then at the same time, Horgan's saying, well, that's not fair. You can't not give us any oil because, it's unfair and it's unconstitutional. It's against the law. So this has been the big fight right now. And at the very least, this is what Notley is trying to do with this Bill 12. She is trying to, she is trying to bring that underneath government control. But more than that, she's trying, along with that, I should say, not necessarily more than that, but along with that, she's trying to give the middle finger to BC and be able to control if that oil goes into BC. Now, since then, since this whole thing has gone on, BC's gas prices have been going up. I haven't had Top Leaf on the podcast for a little bit. I've been in contact with him, and he says that, Top Leaf lives out in BC. He's been telling me about how the oil prices these days, the gas prices, are just through the roof right now. In fact, I think they're actually approaching $2 a liter. Maybe not quite to that point yet, but it's getting pretty bad over there. And Horgan's not helping the situation because he's against the pipeline, but he doesn't want the oil to stop flowing into Alberta. So he wants his cake. He wants to have his cake and eat it too. And even with everything that the government is talking about right now, with everything that the government wants to do, pay out Kinder Morgan with the $2 billion, as Morneau has said, there's no timeline for getting Trans Mountain Pipeline built. So even if this happens, we're going to pay them out. We have no idea how long it's going to take for this to be built. This pipeline was approved, as it says down here, by the Liberal Party in 2016. But even if this goes, the government has no idea on what they're doing with Trans Mountain right now. All they're concerned about is getting the actual payment to them to have it under their control. Now, I do believe that it would benefit the government even if they paid it out. They definitely would want to get the pipeline built for sure, because it would benefit them again and benefit the economy more. And even though Trudeau campaigned on being anti-pipeline, but he's proven himself to be more pro-pipeline than he originally says. That being said, that doesn't mean that he is actually a friend of the oil industry. He actually found himself in a bad middle position where he's not against the pipelines, but he's not for the pipelines. So he doesn't really have people on either side. The environmentalists right now are going more towards Green and NDP because they see Trudeau is not doing enough to protect the environment, even though he's got a few things that he says in play. But they say he's not doing enough to protect the environment. And then on the other side, we have people are saying he's not doing enough to support the oil industry, to support the oil sands, to support the pipeline. So he's actually positioned himself in this middle ground. And he's kind of screwed himself because now he doesn't know which way to go. Does he go towards the environmentalists, which is his base, or does he actually do something that might benefit the economy for once, which he could actually do? I know they like to toot the economy right now, but with the debt that we're racking up and all of the, again, with all the immigration that we bring in and having to support them, with the illegal immigrants coming across the border, they can't sustain this economy, and the economy is on its way down. It's not going to be sustainable. He's flying on what Harper was able to claw back from the 2008 financial crash. But the other thing is right now when we're talking about environmentalists, when their biggest thing when they're talking about why they're against the Trans Mountain Pipeline has to do with oil spills, protecting the coastlines and the wildlife in the coastlines. But the other, not only are they worried about the pipeline actually being spilling and like itself, but they're actually worried about the increase, like more oil tankers. Say like we're going to destroy our economy because oil tankers, that if there's any spills along coastline, it's going to cause a big problem for anybody trying to do trade. It's actually going to affect negatively our economy through that. Except right now, if you go to maritime traffic, this is a great website actually. You can check out and see like all the maritime traffic in real time. Really, I don't think I'm in real time right now, but as you can see, all these reds right now are oil tankers specifically. These aren't just all vessels, but these are oil tankers. So you can see they're active all over the world, especially over here in Africa and the Middle East. We see many over there. We're getting into Mexico and South American region, very active. And even it looks like not very as much as over here, the clusters, but it seems there's some activity along the western United States. But then take a look up at Canada up here. We're looking surprisingly empty, aren't we? And, as we increase and take a look at this. So, let me zoom out a little bit more. We do have some activity that's going along our borders. We are making our trades and we're getting some oil out and stuff. But again, we take a look around here. Look. They're worried. This is British Columbia that they're worried about, and they're worried that there's going to be too many oil tanker activity. There is next to no oil tanker activity. Sure, there's a few that we can see around here, but we're going along these routes here that they've plotted out. There's really not much in comparison to the rest of the world, and we are a country that is rich in oil resources. Yet, and of course, because Alberta is more on the west, it makes sense that the British Columbia would be the closest port that we'd be able to get it out and ship it out to. We could ship it down to our neighbors down here in the U.S. I'm sure we could probably ship it across seas. I'm sure somebody like Japan or China would get in on that. But that's not what the case is right now. Right now, as we look through on it, it's very bare. It's very bare for a country that is very rich in oil resources. It's really a shame to see, because right now, also as it stands, Alberta's the cost for Alberta oil right now, between Trudeau and Notley, what they've done, the taxation that they've done, Alberta oil is actually, they're receiving only 50% of the profits that they should on their oil. This is one of the richest provinces in our country right now. In fact, if you're living in Quebec, you can thank your standard of living to Alberta right now because of the equalization payments. Quebec has received the most out of every province of the equalization payments, 50%. I think it's about almost close to $200 billion ever since the equalization payments came into existence. So Quebec takes the most advantage of it, and and Alberta pays the most in these equalization payments. So right now, if you're in Quebec, you really can thank your standard of living to Alberta, which is one reason why when they canceled, I can't remember right now, but there was a pipeline going out to the Maritimes. That was so that way it could be all our crude oil could be refined in the Maritimes. It would provide jobs there. It was Quebec that put the brakes on that one, and because of that, And because of that, there's no jobs going out there. There's no oil being shipped out there. And now they're doing it again right now with Kinder Morgan and the Trans Mountain Pipeline. So the last time I came to you guys, I was coming to you with article talking about immigration in Canada, and as the CBC article was going on to talk about, it said that right now, when Canadians are told the real numbers of immigration, that their support for immigration drops. That most Canadians believe that the number of immigrants coming in is about 150,000 per year. But this is actually way under the actual limit. Right now, we import about 260,000 immigrants every year, and it's been this rate for the last several years. So that's where we stand right now. And as the government has already come out to say, they say that any debate on immigration needs to be carefully managed, because they know that if there is some debate inside, say, the House of Commons, that they're going to get smacked. They're going to get smacked apart. So this is why they need it to be carefully managed. However, since then, there seems to be an influx of articles coming out talking about immigration, and many of them are very pro-immigration, of course. So the one that actually caught my eye was this one from the Toronto Star. And it says, there's nothing illegal about asylum seekers. Amid a global refugee crisis, the misuse of the term illegal carries a real cost. Well, I don't know what else you're supposed to call an immigrant who doesn't go through the official processes illegally cross over your border, especially when they know it's not at a border crossing. What would you call these aside for illegal? Well, their answer is irregular. Oh, don't we just love that term, irregular immigrants? Yeah, because that's a real fucking term. But anyway, as this article goes on to say, it says, we are concerned about a recent spike in the use of the term illegal to characterize asylum seekers crossing the Canadian-U.S. border. One newspaper speaks of illegal migrants while others focus on illegal boarding crossers. An editorial from the prominent national paper asked Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to yield to Tory measures by tightening the border. Immigration Minister Ahmed Hussein recently said that he has no qualms about using the term illegal. Skipping a little bit ahead, irregular used by the Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada to describe border crossing between ports of entry, so not an official boarding crossing. This is not about people trying to sneak across the border undetected, but about the right to seek asylum from persecution. Oh, is that what they're doing when they're coming across the border? When they come in from the safe, prosperous country of the U.S., they're coming in because they are seeking asylum from persecution. Oh, I'm sure. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights protects this right. Importantly, the 1951 Refugee Convention and the 1967 Protocol, to which Canada is a signatory and which are incorporated into Canadian law, both recognize that refugee claimants should not be penalized for irregular entry into to seek refuge. So they're relying on specifications. They're relying on technicalities in order for them to make their point, to say that these are not illegal border crossers, but they're actually asylum seekers. Well, let's get into this, why don't we? Let's go look at the UN definition of what is a refugee. A refugee is someone who has been forced to flee his or her country because of persecution, war, or violence. A refugee has a well-founded fear of persecution for reason of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership of a particular social group. So that is the UN definition. It says they are forced to flee their country because of persecution. Well, none of these people crossing the U.S.-Canadian border are forced to flee their homes. None of them are forced to. And in fact, the thing is, too, is when America decides that you cannot stay there and they're going to deport you, that doesn't mean that they suddenly become a refugee and then can flee to Canada. But then also the other term that we're using, and they use too, is asylum seekers. Well, let's go down and see that too. Who is an asylum seeker? When people flee their own country and seek sanctuary in another country, they apply for asylum, the right to be recognized as a refugee and receive legal protection material assistance. Any asylum seeker must demonstrate that his or her fear of persecution in his or her home country is well founded. Well, once again, many of these people coming across the border, first of all, they're talking about how they have to flee their own country. These people have already fled their country, and they're in America. America may not, unless they are American citizens, is not their home country. So how can they flee from another country, especially when that country has already in the past offered them refugee status? Some of these people still have refugee status in America, but one of the reasons that they're come running to Canada is they're worried it's going to be taken away. Well, that is up to the American law. That's really is. It depends on what America decides. Their government decides. And just because they decide to not offer someone refugee status, if they don't feel that they fit the characteristics of a refugee, then they have every right to deport that person, and that does not mean that Canada has to take them on. There's a big difference when we're talking about what a real refugee is, and somebody from America is not a refugee. This is also my problem with not even real refugees, but some people who just say they're American refugees is because they didn't like the government or whatever, so now they've left their home and they call themselves an American refugee, but they don't. In my opinion, a lot of these fucking people are retards who do that, because sure, America has some problems, but you know what? A lot of the places people go have more authoritarian governments. So they actually flee one country that offers them some relative freedoms, even though they have some problems with it, for another country that actually has less freedoms. But let's move on. So that was the UN definition of both refugee and asylum seeker. Well, here we go with the Canadian Council for Refugees, and the Canadian Council for Refugee is biased towards immigration and refugee. This is pro-immigrant site. Pro-refugee site. That is what the council is. And it even says here, a person who is forced to flee from persecution or is located outside of their home country, Well, sure, these people do fit the characteristics of living outside their home country, but nobody has been forced to flee from America. If we even go back to the Haitians, they were talking about the temporary protective status being taken away, and that was, 10 years almost, maybe, after the earthquake. Maybe not quite. Maybe it was 7 or something like that. But anyway, so they take it, and then they willing to take it with temporary protective status, and then they come running towards the border. However, this is still not even allowed, really, because it's not even really allowed anyway, because it even states, we're going to see it in a minute, where it talks about that if you had temporary protective status in America, then that doesn't qualify you for refugee status in Canada. Anyway, we'll take a look through some government sites. Because, when they started talking about this, I really, really thought that I was not going to find anything in Canada that talked about irregular migrants. But there is. The evaluation of the Global Assistance for Irregular Migrants Program. But once again, the article, the Toronto Star, talks about how they were irregular migrants, but this program actually is, when they call irregular migrants, is something completely different to what they're talking about. So it says the Global so the group they're talking about is Global Assistance for Irregular Migrants, GAME. So it says, GAME program was established in 2013 as a component of Canada's migrant smuggling prevention strategy. Headed by the Special Advisor on Human Smuggling and Illegal Migration within the Privy Council office. The Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development is no longer responsible for activities under the GAME program. They continue to play a key role in capacity building in order to prevent and respond to migrant smuggling activities and enhance cooperation with source and transit countries. Well, so this all has to do with migrants smuggling into the country. So that's what the irregular migrants program has to concern with. And the thing is, too, is actually there is a smuggling program on the American side. Not from the government or anything like that, but there are groups of people who are using their services. And that usually has to do with whether giving the migrants a place to stay or whether driving them to the border. And that's their way of making money off of this. So there is a smuggling program right now, but this is actually encouraging the mass immigration as it stands. We actually would have to have the opposite reaction in order if we wanted to prevent this. While Canada is being open, accepting, and saying that these are asylum seekers, these are refugees, when in fact we need to be turning them away, because that when we're taking them, we're fueling that smuggling industry that's going on right now. Now, I don't know, I haven't heard anything too nasty coming out of there yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if sometime soon we start hearing something. Maybe one migrant woman gets raped or something like that. Maybe somebody gets murdered on their travel up. It's probably only a matter of time, especially if we're dealing about a smuggling industry. The bigger the smuggling industry gets too, the more brutal it gets. We can just look down to Mexico at some of their smuggling industries that they have, and it can be awful for the way that it is treated. In fact, there was an article that came out a few years ago that said that 80% of women that are traveling through Mexico in order to get to America are raped. And this isn't necessarily by border guards in America, while that does happen too. It actually tends to happen most by the people that are smuggling them into the country, because they know that they can't go to the police, they can't do anything about it. In fact, in this article even talked about how many women and even some underage girls, before the trip starts, take birth control because they see their rape as a real possibility because of this. So these are the dangers that come with migrant smuggling. And not to mention, we also hear about how we can overload them in trucks and stuff. And if we're talking about Mexico, where it's hot, they can be driving for hours through in the hot sun in a metal truck, and they're just cooking alive in there, essentially. So we're actually, by taking on these people, we're actually encouraging this smuggling program that is going on just on the other side of our border. But we can't do anything about it. We really can't, even if we'd love to. So the game program activities are activated when the PCO, the Privy Council Office Special Advisor, informs CIC, which is the Citizenship and Immigration Canada, through a trigger letter of a planned human smuggling event, and requests the CIC Deputy Minister implement the program. And this program is expected to achieve the following outcomes. As we can take a look here, I've highlighted the two. Migrants are screened, registered, assessed, and referred, where necessary, to refugee status determination. Well, many of these ones are crossing the border, and they say that many people who cross the border irregularly, as they put it, that they turn themselves in at an immigration office. I don't actually believe this to be the case. While maybe right now this is might be happening more and more because of what Justin Trudeau's tweet said, most of the time this doesn't seem to be the case. And there were plenty of reports, especially coming out of rebel media, where they were just showing migrants walking across the border and just kept going. Just kept going. And then the other part was CIC contributes to the detection, disruption, and deterrence of human smuggling and illegal migration activities. Well, that's not what we're doing right now. Our RCMP are welcoming them in and just getting them processed and welcoming them into Canada. And we're not deterrents to any human smuggling right now. What our government is doing is actually encouraging it. All right, what about asylum? Claiming asylum in Canada. Making an asylum claim in Canada? Individuals can make an asylum claim in Canada at any port of entry, or in an island, or at an inland Canada Border Service Agency or Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada office. Factors determining the individual's eligibility to make a refugee claim include whether the claimant has committed a serious crime, made a previous claim in Canada, or received protection from another country. Now, that last one, protection from another country, could be for two reasons. If they've been refused protection from another country, there's probably a good reason why, and that should mean we shouldn't offer them protection either, depending on the situation. However, what could also play a factor into this has to do with the Canada, here we go, Canada-U.S. Safe Third World Country Agreement. And it says, under the Canada-U.S. Safe Third Country Agreement, persons seeking refugee protection must make a claim in the first country they arrive in, United States or Canada, unless they qualify for an exemption to the agreement. So what that means is that if they arrive in America and make a claim there, they cannot then come to Canada and make a refugee claim. That is against the rules. But that is exactly what many of these people are doing. But we're taking them on anyway. Yeah, I think that's all I had for there. So then, this one actually in particular says irregular border crossing and asylum in Canada. Right down here, claiming refugee status in Canada, what you need to know. There are specific requirements to be considered a refugee. Not having or losing temporary protective status in the U.S. is not grounds for a refugee claim. And Canada does not have any special programs for people with temporary protective status. This was actually the start of our problem. This is where everything began. It began because the Haitians had their temporary protective status removed and then they were invited into Canada. Well, you can't do that. You can't do that just because temporary protective status is not a qualifier for refugee status. So the government of Canada is actually going against its own laws by stating this. They are circumventing the law by allowing this to happen. I think we've already covered that. Okay, so the irregular border crossing statistics. And it says, for the purpose of the report, irregular border crossers are defined as individuals who enter Canada between official ports of entry. And I can't remember when this was released, but I believe it's making reference to what's been going on recently. Refugee protection can be conferred in Canada if the Refugee Protection Division determines that the claimant meets the United Nations definition of convention refugee, which has been incorporated into Canadian law. Convention refugees are people who have well-funded fear of persecution because of their race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership of a particular social group. Well, once again, Donald Trump made changes to the immigration policies from several places. This does not constitute them having a well-founded fear of persecution just because he's doing this. In fact, he did it for the sake of national security. He did it because he looked at the countries and saw that this is where a lot of the people who committed terrorist attacks in America were coming from. So he said, until this can be sorted out, until we can vet the people properly, we're closing the borders. This does not mean that it is persecution. It is not a well-founded fear. But the thing is Justin Trudeau, in his mind, in the Liberal Party of Canada's mind, this would be a founding fear. Trump is the problem in the Trudeau's mind. He is the second coming of Hitler in the Liberal Party mind. They hate the Trump government, and the Trump government hates him and them. All of them, the Liberal Party. So we already covered that. But one of the problem is, too, is as this is going on, we're at, as I said, we're doubling down now. Everyone everywhere is starting to double down on allowing a lot more people allowed to come in and giving them more rights. For instance, right over here, we had one from Global News. This came out today, I'm pretty sure, where it says cities across Canada want to let non-Canadians vote in municipal elections. The city of Vancouver recently became the latest in a string of Canadian cities to join the fight to give permanent residents a vote in municipal elections. However, the unanimous vote by Vancouver City Council had renewed hopes that the policy is about to change, and whether Canada's growing immigrant population means that federal voting rights reform could soon follow. Permanent residents are people who have immigrated to Canada but who are not Canadian citizens. They're entitled to social benefits and healthcare coverage and can also work, live, or study anywhere in Canada. They're also entitled to protection under Canadian law and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. 1 in 5 Canadians are immigrants as of the 2016 census, bringing the total number of immigrants residing in Canada to 7.5. Now again, when we're talking about the breaking point for Canada as immigrants, maybe this is part of the reason that such a huge number of Canadians aren't actually even born in our own country. That I do see as a problem. But the main reason they have a problem with this is they're saying that these people with permanent residence, they pay their taxes, they pay municipal taxes, and are subject to the decision of municipal officials, but they get little say in their election. Well, voting is a right of a citizen. Now, I even don't think, I'll be honest, and I don't even think that a permanent resident should be able to have the same rights as it's offered in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Values, because once again, that is restricted, in my opinion, for citizens, not just anybody who comes to live in our country. Now, people who are underneath temporary working permits or students, then they don't really get that. But even just for we're talking about permanent residents, sure, they're permanent residents, but they're not citizens. That's what comes with citizenship. And again, like we're just seeing more about this talk about debate and how it could undermine all the support for immigration. And this is coming from department data. Internal department data suggests that over 50% of Canadians believe the number of immigrants who come to Canada every year is about right. Yet again, as we stated, an earlier report also states that now that when people are told the real numbers, they turn and flip. I believe that, I really hope anyway, that Canada is starting to wake up, truly, because we are having this problem, and Justin Trudeau wants to pull in, what, an extra million a year of immigrants? A million over the next 3 years of immigrants? This is a huge amount of number, and we're having plenty of problems in Europe right now. Right now, there's a clash of cultures because there's just people feel that they've been displaced in their own homes. And this is what a lot of people, I think a lot of Canadians feel like. We walk around, and then half the time it's not even language from our own country that we're hearing. And people say that that's prejudice, that you don't like hearing somebody else another language in your country, but really the main problem is just it feels like your entire culture is being taken away. Not that Justin Trudeau cares. Justin Trudeau doesn't care at all. Saturday, the 21st of April 2018, and it was the Liberal Party Policy Convention in Halifax, Nova Scotia. So Justin Trudeau ended up giving a speech there, and I didn't initially watch it when it happened, which was a few hours ago from when I'm recording this. But he ended up slamming the Conservatives a lot in this and talked about their divisive campaign. So we're going to take a look through, and I'm going to make some commentary on what Justin Trudeau says. So without any further ado, let's get to it.
What a crowd, what an amazing convention. I'm told we're around 3,000 strong, and that almost 1,600 of you have actually never attended a convention before.
I gotta say though, just looking out in the crowd, like they got a few young people right up here, but if you're kind of looking past that at everybody else, these are not really too many young individuals here. We look at the back, they look to be about middle-aged and older people. These women sitting up front, these Asian women, they're probably close to middle age. This guy here. So really, all in all, there's not as many young people as there appears to be. And when you're talking about in politics, you want to have the younger crowd, especially the up-and-coming votes. You want them because you're hoping to garner them as lifelong voters. So, and just judging from other liberal, whatever they happen to be, fundraisers or get-togethers, a lot of times that we've seen, I think they're usually fundraisers. Usually there's not a lot of young people there. In fact, the buildings are quite empty in comparison. Like we were comparing before sometimes Kathleen Wynne's fundraisers and her speeches in comparison to Doug Ford's, where Doug Ford would pack a house and have hundreds of people there, depending if the location can hold that many people. Meanwhile, Kathleen Wynne would be in a very dinky establishment with maybe 3 or 4 tables made up of people willing to donate. So it's a big difference. And again, you can hold, you've got your core base, which are the ones that have appeared here. It's also the reason they held it in Halifax, because right now that's where a lot of the Maritimes ended up voting for the Liberals. But all in all, not as many young faces as you would like to see at one of these conventions.
So welcome to the most open political movement in Canada.
Once again, you look behind these kids.
It is now yours. yours to shape and build and grow. We need your enthusiasm and ideas, your positivity and your energy. But most of all, we need your hope and hard work.
You know, anybody who's been paying attention over the last 10 years, we've heard this sort of speech before, only it didn't come from Canada. It came down from the US. It was Barack Obama. Hope, change. These are the sort of things that he did, that he campaigned on in his 2008, when he won the 2008 presidential election. But then what ended up coming out of that? Absolutely nothing. That's because you can't just say hope and change and then not have an idea where you want to go with that. You have to have an idea. Now, the difference is, I would say, between that is when Barack Obama campaigned on hope and change, I don't think he really knew where he wanted to go with that. The difference is Trudeau definitely already knows his left-wing agenda. He knows where he wants people to go. But what he says there at the beginning to the young people, and he says, it's yours. Yeah, thanks. That's the, after what Trudeau's just did, it's the equivalent of taking the new Jag, driving it through a frickin' mud pit, taking it home, and then saying, here, it's yours now. That's pretty much what Justin Trudeau has done with Canada. He hasn't preserved a Canada for us. He's burning Canada down, and then he's giving us the ashes and saying, here you go, it's yours now. Well, thank you very fucking much, Justin, but I'm, and my generation, for the ones who care, are going to have to spend the rest of our lives building this back up and trying to repair the damage you've done, so that way our children won't be stuck with the same problems. However, this is the same sort of argument that every generation before has made, and nothing has changed, so I don't see why anything else would now. But moving on.
Hope and hard work are exactly what got us to where we are today. Il y a 5 ans ce mois-ci, vous m'avez accordé votre confiance en faisant de moi votre chef. Mon argument durant la course à la chefferie était simple. Les Canadiens avaient arrêté de faire confiance au Parti libéral parce que le Parti libéral avait arrêté de faire confiance dans les Canadiens. J'ai jamais prétendu avoir toutes les réponses, mais j'ai toujours su qu'ensemble, les Canadiens les avaient. Et je vous ai promis que personne ne travaillerait plus fort avec vous pour les trouver.
So he's pretty much said that nobody else, talking about himself and the Liberals, will work hard in order to pretty much work for our future, is what he's saying. But this isn't what Justin Trudeau has done at all. He has done the complete opposite. He saddled us with a shit ton of debt while making his buddies richer. In fact, he has been a lot, like, he rages against the 1%, the people who need to pay their fair share, yet he's actually lined their pockets. Meanwhile, he's accusing Andrew Scheer, Doug Ford, and every other conservative in Canada of being the ones who are in bed with the businesses, but this doesn't seem to be the case. Well, they're in bed with their own businesses, but the point is for Justin Trudeau has proved his hypocrisy, and no, he is not. His party and Justin Trudeau have not worked hard for Canadians. They've only worked hard for themselves to solidify their power.
Cela dit, le défi est encore le même aujourd'hui. Bâtir un programme axé sur les Canadiens de la classe moyenne et les gens qui travaillent fort tous les jours pour en faire partie.
Once again, talking about the working and middle class and talking about what the Liberals do for them. Well, what has the Liberals done for the middle class and the working class, aside for targeting them, aside for raising their taxes, making it harder for them to make ends meet, and then trying to subsidize every other field where they feel that they can take control? For instance, in Toronto, right in 2018, after the minimum wage went up, a lot of families in the area were having trouble making ends meet. So they ended up, because actually the childcare rates went up, so they found it hard to make ends meet. So what did the Ontario Liberals do? They subsidize the childcare profession, once again giving it another industry that takes on government money, taxpayer money, which then, in a sense, brings it underneath, in at least partially underneath government control. On top of that, he started putting taxes on things like tips for bartenders and waitresses and waiters. Why should their tips be taxed? They already don't make the official minimum wage. They make what is called serving minimum wage, which is a little bit under. But then if you actually cared about the working class, the middle class, these are not the areas you would target. And especially you would be doing more for the oil industry, and if you actually cared that much about the working class. Now, a lot of the left actually say he is more pro-pipeline than he did say. That has been proven by Justin Trudeau. He has been more pro-pipeline than what he ran on. But that being said, he has not done enough, because even underneath his leadership, the value of our oil has dropped. Right now, Alberta brings in about 50% of its revenue, what it should, on their oil. He really hasn't done enough.
Bâtir le mouvement politique qui fera de ces idées une réalité. Et ensemble, c'est exactement ce que nous avons fait. C'est ce que vous avez fait avec des centaines de milliers de vos concitoyens qui se sont portés volontaires pour faire des téléphones et du porte-à-porte. Et des millions de Canadiens nous ont accordé leur confiance pour concrétiser leurs idées et leurs rêves. Together, we did it by challenging conventional wisdom, by blowing the doors off the echo chamber that had become politics in this country, which
they blew off the door that has become they blew open the doors that was the echo chambers in politics in this country. Is that what he said? Because nobody is in a bigger echo chamber right now than the left. Now, don't get me wrong, the right has its own echo chambers, and that's a problem too. But the right is willing to engage with the other side, at least in debate, a lot more than the left is willing to. The left-wing politicians are in their bubbles. In fact, Justin Trudeau is in his own echo chamber, and he tries to enforce it that way. Right now, just a few days ago, it was MP Sims, I believe, who is a Liberal Party member, a member of Parliament, and he ended up voting against Justin Trudeau's summer job programs, where the companies had to be pro-choice, pro-abortion, and any group that was pro-life wouldn't get government funding. He wanted his Liberals to vote in tandem. They whipped the votes. Well, Sims didn't do this. He said, no, it's not right. We've gone too far. The Liberal Party has gone too far. I'm not going to vote for it. Well, he's in trouble. I can't remember what's happened to him, if he actually got removed or not. I don't think he did, but he got a scolding from Justin Trudeau. And others that have tried to approach Justin Trudeau have also gotten a scolding. When Bill C-71, I believe, it's either Bill C, yeah, I think it's Bill C-71 or C-75, but I'm pretty sure it's C-71, was the gun control bill that was introduced just about a month ago. And again, when he got questions on that in a staff meeting, he ripped the MP apart. So Justin Trudeau has enforced his own echo chamber.
Which makes it possible to have a convention room that looks like this one, that looks just like Canada.
You want to see real diversity where people aren't forced by a quota? And once again, you talk about that, but there seem to be a hell of a lot of white people in that one. I know you're against that, Justin Trudeau. I know you think that we need to make way for the minorities and everything like that, but you still had a lot of white people in your crowd. Now, you go to a Doug Ford rally, well, you'll see all sorts of people there. Doug Ford didn't even try, and he brought in all sorts of diversity. Black people, white people, Asians, Arabs, people from all over are base supporters for Doug Ford. And he did it without enforcing identity politics. He did it while actually slamming identity politics. So he's talking about, he's going to get into the the politics of fear coming out of the Conservatives, when actually right now a lot more of the Conservative Party is more unified with actual Canadians than Justin Trudeau and his squad is. And look at that. A few Asians, but a lot of white.
We did it by having the courage to present new ideas to Canadians about the economy, about how to create good middle-class jobs in the 21st century.
The economy that he is pretty much destroying at the moment, he's racking up our debt. I know he loves to say the economy is doing well, the economy is doing well, but yeah, it's not doing as nearly as well as they like to say it is. And they talk about these jobs. Meanwhile, the minimum wage killed a lot of jobs for low-income families when it got raised in Ontario, and it has done that for other provinces that have raised their minimum wage to high standards as well. And many of the jobs that they create are temporary jobs, and many of them are government jobs. These aren't jobs that are sustainable, and many of them are jobs that are really necessary. It's just overstaff, more bureaucracy. That's all he's brought to this whole process. They haven't really created any jobs in the private sector where people are more likely to get paid, considering the Phoenix pay system problem right now. But this is where you can sustain the public sector, is in the private sector. That's where you need to create most of your jobs. And then when you create a lot of your jobs in the private sector, that can at least help afford the public policy, the public programs that Justin Trudeau wants to enforce. But right now, he's just racking up a shit ton of debt. He's just using it as his own piggy bank account. That's all he's done for us.
We did it by reaffirming our values and standing up for them. See, when the Harper Conservatives spent millions upon millions of dollars on personal attacks and the politics of fear and division, we didn't join them in the gutter. We beat them the old-fashioned way. We had better ideas for Canadians and recruited a better team to turn those ideas into real change.
One thing he did say in that whole thing was right. They did do it the old-fashioned way. Money. They got lots and lots of money from third parties and foreign influences. This has been a problem that has been reported on, but yet doesn't seem to come back to affect the Liberal Party. Many times we've been hearing about how Lead Now was running a targeted campaign in order to force out the Conservatives, but at the same time, Lead Now was receiving a lot of funding coming from outside. Now, they ended up to get through the loopholes, because most of the funding came in before the 6 months before the election happened, because that's a loophole. These third parties can only accept so much money when it's election time, 6 months before election time. But before that, the rules are a lot looser. So this is when the money was getting funneled in, and then these parties using and targeted certain ridings. So they actually did it the old-fashioned way, through money and dirty cronyism is essentially how he got into office. That's why I compare him more to Hillary Clinton. A lot of people like to point to him and say he's the Canadian version of Obama. No way. He is the Canadian version of Hillary Clinton. The way he operates, the type of people that he associates with, it's a lot more like Clinton than it is like Obama.
We challenged the pessimistic, divisive politics with a positive vision of the future that includes all Canadians from all backgrounds, regions, and walks of life.
That's true, because you imported them all once you got into office. But the thing is, too, is they talk about how the Conservatives ran on fear. when really it's the Liberals that have ran on fear this entire time. Justin Trudeau's Liberals have been all based on division and fear. This is what he does with identity politics. This is what he does with the constant talks of Islamophobia and racism in Canada. This is exactly what he has been doing. He divides everyone down these lines. He is actually creating the segregation lines of who's white, who's Muslim, who's Asian, by focusing on these issues rather than focusing on us as Canadians. So he talks about these issues when he is actually the biggest criminal in enforcing these policies, this politics of fear. God, I hate his fucking smile too.
Sunny ways, my friends. Sunny ways.
Not with the amount of debt I'm taking on.
But let me tell you this. We can stack our record up against any governments. You see, there are those who say our movement is about image and not policy. Well, tell that to the 300,000 kids who were living in poverty 3 years ago and who aren't now, whose families can enjoy simple things like better school supplies and healthier food.
And how did he do this? Now, I don't know if that number is actually true, that 300,000 kids were living in poverty and now aren't these days. I don't actually know if that part is true. But what he did was not give these people an outlet to a better life. He didn't try and create opportunity for them to build their way up to a better life. He just started throwing more money at everything. That has been Trudeau's whole plan. All he does is throw money at everything. There's a difference between throwing money and resources. You can throw money into an impoverished area, but if that money is not being used properly, it's not going to change the community the way you want. And you're talking about, now they can afford school supplies. Well, maybe if you were providing them with an opportunity to move up in their job, instead of stifling the businesses that'll give them that opportunity, then maybe they already could afford school supplies and don't need the government to step in. But what this also does is, when the government does this, is it creates like an addiction to the government funding. This is the problem when the government gets too much involved, and this is why they just throw money at it instead of resources. It gets people addicted to it, and then when the Conservatives come along and want to cut that pipe off, which is actually cutting off the addiction, they're trying to help people by doing that, they're perceived as the enemy. But they'll do it, they want to offset it in another way. The way that the Conservatives and right want to offset it would be by allowing businesses to flourish. Now, of course, we need to keep that within reason. We can't just take away all the laws and then let the business do whatever the hell they want. We do need some regulation in place, such as labor laws, for one reason or another. However, the government has just burdened with all businesses right now with this. They've just burdened them with a shit ton of debt, with a shit ton of bureaucracy, and instead of them being able to flourish, they're forced to make cuts, and usually the cuts come from employees.
Try telling that to the more than 3,600 communities with projects from our infrastructure plan, projects that wouldn't exist otherwise because both the Conservatives and the NDP didn't have the confidence to invest in Canada's future.
What the hell are you talking about? We all took a look at the budget 2018. You made over 300 references to gender, 2 references to infrastructure, and any part of the budget going to infrastructure, it said that you would predict a increase of less than 1% of our infrastructure. How the hell is that investing in our future? Infrastructure was one of the main things Justin Trudeau has pushed. I mean, last summer when the flooding happened in Quebec, this was another reason for him to say we need to invest in infrastructure because of climate change. More of these storms are going to happen. Yet when it came time for him to actually invest, he didn't. He put all the money into a virtue signal. Look at us, we're so great, we're all about equality. Jesus. He doesn't know how to run a fucking country, and he is just running ours into the ground faster than anybody else possibly could.
And you just try telling that to the more than 50,000 Syrians who would still be fleeing persecution if the Conservatives had had their way, but who instead are building communities and growing the economy all across our country today.
Bullshit. Bullshit. Because right there, he full out was saying that the Conservatives wouldn't bring any of them. That wasn't the case. What Harper wanted to do was he wanted to bring in less refugees per year. But what also I think Harper would have done differently that Trudeau didn't do is that despite this all talk that Trudeau says about how we help the Syrian refugees, you know what Trudeau actually did? Less than, I think, 2% of the Syrian refugees came from refugee camps. In fact, many of them had been settled elsewhere in the area, such as Jordan. Many had been settled in Jordan and then were uprooted and brought over to Canada through an agreement made with a few areas in the Middle East. So Justin Trudeau didn't help the people in need. On top of that, he also didn't help the people most likely to be targeted by ISIS or by what was going on in the war, because he left Christian Syrians and atheist Syrians over there without a fucking care. Because once again, about 95 to 98% of the Syrian refugees we brought in were Muslim. Now, I know that the area has a lot more Islamic people over there than they do have Christians, but that is not even close to what the actual demographics are. So he left them, and we were hearing plenty of reports, maybe not in the mainstream media, but people all over were talking about how the Christians in Syria were being persecuted heavily, yet he didn't do anything to help. Oh, and not to mention that many of the refugees that came over during the 2015 migrant crisis, a significant portion of them were economic migrants. Not even that they were fleeing persecution in their countries, that they were fleeing a war or anything, but they fell in with the crowds that were fleeing that persecution, that war, in order to come in and live in a society that'll offer them a better life without offering anything back to that society.
Try telling it to victims of domestic violence, whose assailants will no longer be able to own a gun thanks to common sense gun legislation, which the Conservatives opposed to.
Oh, bullshit. Bullshit. This was just a fucking excuse to grab our weapons. That's all he did. He made that claim, yet most of the guns that are used in a crime are illegal weapons already, which means that they're not even covered underneath that. It didn't matter. It didn't fucking matter. Most of the crimes in Canada that are shootings are committed with handguns, which are very fucking hard to get anyway in Canada. So most of them are already illegal, which means that it did absolutely nothing in order to solve this problem. It didn't focus on gangs at all, where the real problem is when it comes to these shootings. And on top of that, when it comes to domestic violence, actually, when we're talking men as the abuser, as the attacker, and the woman as the victim, are actually very, very, very unlikely to use a weapon. They're more likely to use their body, whether that means choking, beating someone up, but actually using a weapon in and of itself is rare. And on top of that, using a gun is even rarer. The one most likely to use a weapon in domestic violence is actually the woman. They've stated that a lot more times when the man is the one who is killed, that it's more likely to be a gun then used by the woman, or it's going to be a weapon such as a baseball bat, a blunt object, something like that. Usually they say probably because of size differences is the main reason that women will use weapons more than men. So when he talked about domestic violence, he really did not, this gun legislation really made no difference to it at all. So really at the end of the day, his gun legislation was just a way to grab our weapons, to grab the guns from the people, and it didn't actually solve any of the issues affecting Canada right now. Because again, gangs are the biggest problem when we're talking about shootings. So this was a lie, a full-blown, straight-to-your-face lie.
Try telling it to all the Canadians, particularly young people, who want Canada to do its part to fight climate change and protect the environment.
Protect the environment? Yeah, absolutely. But I want it done in an actual productive way. For instance, let's focus on pollution. We used to focus on pollution, but now it's just all about climate change. So instead of installing a carbon tax, which does nothing except tax me and everybody else, why don't you do something such as clean up some fucking rivers? Why don't you reduce some of the actual smog in some areas that we have? Why don't you focus that way? And on top of that, if you're actually really fucking concerned about climate change and fighting it, then why don't you get on the fucking countries that are emitting terrible CO2 emissions, if that's what your concern is, like China? Why don't you get on China? Because right now Canada's a lot fucking more when it comes to green energy and fighting the environment than somebody like China does.
Because they now have a government that is pricing carbon pollution, investing in clean technologies, and protecting our coasts with a world-class oceans protection plan.
Right now, we have all of Trudeau's green energy programs. What he wants to do relies on government funding, but they're not sustainable in and of themselves. So they're not actually producing anything. They're actually right now kind of more of a detriment to the economy. And on top of that, he's not using the natural resources that we have in order to make money to maybe fund these green energy programs. Instead, he's just going to put a lot of our taxpayer money towards it, and he's going to tax the hell out of us. I think we've seen enough of this crap right now. I think we've gone through enough. We've seen enough, heard enough of what he's saying in order to get the gist of what the rest of it is. As you can see, just like everything else Justin Trudeau is a load of crap. Everything he does is a load of crap, and he shouldn't be trusted to lead our country whatsoever. If Canadians actually vote this man in come 2019, I don't know what the fuck I'm going to do. I'm probably going to, at that point, lost a lot of faith in the people of my country. Because if they actually think that he's doing a good job, then we're in a really scary position as a country. Well, thank you all for joining me today. I'll talk to you guys soon.